Yo, what's up? I'm KallaTheYapper, and I'm about another reaction. Today I'm going to react to this video made by the Nigerian Perspective. It's about, 2 days old? 3 days old? And it's how Amith exposes Genshin's god-level character problem. I'm going to say this right now. I'm already hard disagreeing with this take, and I'm going to go in depth to explain why as we, progress through this video. Because for some weird reason, again, people are acting like Columbina got the rug pulled from under her, or even us, the player base, when it came down to her gameplay. I had a whole back and forth with a nigga in the Nigerian Perspectives community post about Columbina's gameplay, because in my honest to God opinion, niggas are not just overblew, but continue to overblow her gameplay to be like, oh man, it's the worst thing ever. Oh man, I had expectation of X, but like can't explain what the expectation was that they had of Columbina's character, because they were like, oh well, because Child and Wanderer said this about the character, therefore it shouldn't match that expectation. When it's like, no, just because a character said something about another character, which is hearsay and not the confirmed truth of what the character is or how they operate, does not mean that someone's hearsay should be the word of law. Like, no, it shouldn't be what we base off our entire perception of a character. It should be multiple things, not just one character's hearsay or one or two characters' hearsay who aren't friends with said character or don't know that character personally. Anyway, we're going to get into that as we progress forward. So let's go ahead and get the video started, shall we?
Is that it wasn't always...
Oh, hold up. My bad. I kind of already watched 3 minutes of this video because I was contemplating on whether or not where I wanted to start it from. But I'm just going to restart it from the beginning, and then we're just going to push forward.
You see, right now, both Genshin Impact and Wooden Waves are possibly at the single highest points they've ever been in their entire lifespan. I mean, in Wooden Waves, we just finished the 3.1 story, one of the, if not the single greatest story in the entire game. A story so absolutely fantastic that they literally made grown men cry on stream.
It ain't make me cry, but I did enjoy the story. I will admit that. Before someone comes in my comments and tells me, oh, you're just a woo-wah hate channel. Shut the fuck up, nigga. No, I'm not. If I hated the story, if I hated the game as a whole, I would express my hate blatantly every time I do a reaction. Every time I pumped out a stream playing the game, I would just be hating for the sake of hating. For the love of the game. But that's not how I roll. Now, let us proceed.
In front of hundreds, if not thousands of people, and that was incredible to witness.
Oh, getting to share this final journey with you makes me so.
And also, I think the only reason a lot of these people cry to this moment is because they're going through a lot of shit in their own personal life right now, so probably it resonates with them somewhat. Granted, it doesn't resonate with me personally, so I'm honestly, this moment didn't invoke like strong emotion from me. And it's not because I'm heartless, it's because it's only like certain moments that invoke emotion out of me when I go back and rewatch it. Maybe if I rewatch this scene, maybe it might invoke emotion out of me, but like in the moment it just didn't. There's like certain movie scenes that I go back and rewatch that's via like a reaction mashups, and I sit there and really soak in the scene that's happening, and I do end up tearing up a little bit.
It's basically the child protecting the parents.
But then on the Genshin Impact side, we also just wrapped up the Columbina story, which is one of the greatest stories we've ever experienced in Genshin Impact as well. I mean, there was so much plot progression, from meeting the Moon Sisters to finally learning more about Nibelung. There was just a lot to unpack and dissect within.
That's not really plot progression to learn more about Nibelung. That's more like more lore revelation. I wouldn't call that plot progression, personally.
From meeting the Moon Sisters to finally learning more about Nibelung.
Unless you're talking about the plot progression of the entire story of Nod Cry, then yeah, sure, that is plot progression.
A lot to unpack and dissect within this new Genshin Impact story. But while I was playing through both of these stories, and more importantly, while I was experiencing the characters that these games gave us, I started to notice something very interesting. See, looking at the Wooden Waves characters like Amith and Lug, and then looking back at characters like Columbina and Varka in Genshin Impact, there's been something very important that stood out to me, especially when it comes to how future characters should be perceived, and more importantly, how they're actually being depicted in both of these games. And really,
he needs to be more accurate and say gameplay. We're not talking about the depiction of the character in story. We're talking about gameplay. That's the whole point of this video. Gameplay, not their story perception. Because again, like I said earlier at the start of this reaction, hearsay about information from another character is not something that's 100% valid. It's not 100% factual, because something that a character says about another character is a 50% chance of it being true. And that entirely depends on, the relationship this person has with this character. Or, well, actually, I think it solely depends on the relationship that said person has with said character, right? When you hear the Knights of Favonius talk about Varka and how strong he is, we can tell that they're not lying about it, especially how much they gas him up. And then we see him in the story. We see how he gets down. We see how he is as an individual, as a person. So everything we've learned about Varka from hearsay and the little moments where he's popped up in the story from just his voice, right? We got a solid, concrete idea of Varka and how he is, right? So now we're about to witness his strength, which we kind of already did somewhat in the story before his character release. But now we're actually kind of going full gun-ho in it now, because we didn't really see him fight as much in the story. Now we're about to see him fight in version 6.4. Right? So his perception matches everything we've met up till now. We knew that he trained Razor to use a greatsword. And look at what we see in his gameplay. He's using dual great swords, and he's moving about. He's moving, he's dodging, he whiffing, he doing all type of shit, right? He's leaping into the air. He's double grand slamming in his plunge attacks. So from what I'm seeing from his gameplay, it matches everything that we understand about his character and who he's taught to wield said weapons. It matches 1-to-1. So I don't see how people have an issue with that. The only thing that I'm really seeing, honestly, I'm going to say this now before we continue forward, is that people are playing Withering Waves, they're looking at Genshin Impact's gameplay, and they're just complaining about the fact that Genshin Impact's gameplay isn't fast-paced like Withering Waves is. When it comes down to like, they're doing they're doing parry attacks, they're doing counter attacks. They're double jumping, they're doing air combat, and all the other stuff. That's the real complaint of this whole thing. People want Genshin's gameplay to be Withering Waves. But people fail to realize that not every damn game that exists needs to be like Withering Waves. Just because both Genshin and Wuwa are action RPG games does not mean both games need to play exactly the same. And I will show examples of this moving forward, using another game as an example, which I'm going to use 2 other games as an example to prove my point. But anyway, let us continue.
Really, depending on who you are and where you personally stand in the whole Genshin versus Wooden Waves conversation, this might either be something very important or something potentially detrimental to the future of your favorite gacha game. And that
honestly is not detrimental. Anyone taking this as detrimental, you're overblowing it. I'm gonna say that right now. Hold on, what was the first thing he said? Hold on.
Might either be something very important or something.
Honestly, I'm gonna say this right now. This conversation related to this is not important. And what I mean by that is, it is not so important that everyone in the damn community needs to be outraged over the fact that Columbina isn't doing like absurd shit in her gameplay. For example, her using the one beam blast attack to put the final nail in the coffin on Dottore. People will sit there and look at that and be like, why is she doing that in her ult animation? Because that move wasn't some ultimate move. Right? It was a one-time use thing. And her character had already been designed and made before that moment in the story, honestly speaking. So why would they even add that? I mean, the closest thing you could say is depending on what lunar reaction you're doing, because she then triggers a coordinated attack that's like a nuke, where it will one hit your opponent, depending on how you build the character, obviously, where all 3 moons are lined up together and they look like a singular moon. I may have to pull up Columbina's gameplay to show you that as well. Anyway, let's continue.
Potentially detrimental to the future of your favorite gacha game. And that's exactly what I want to talk about in this video. So if you enjoyed this kind of content, make sure.
And Arknecht's infield just came out as well. We know those niggas be doing crazy movement in the story. Their gameplay doesn't match 1-to-1 for every damn thing they do. They're not moving in such fluid motion in their gameplay as they do in the story. Obviously not. But like, who's complaining about that? Nobody.
Make sure to like the video and tell me your thoughts. How did you personally feel about the recent stories in Genshin Impact and Wooden Waves? And even more, how did you find how the characters felt within both of these arcs, both from a story perspective and a gameplay perspective? Were you
Story perspective was great. Gameplay was fine. Niggas acting like her gameplay suddenly was just like, oh my gosh, it's like, oh my god, the worst thing ever. And completely ignore what we saw in the story. To me, you're foolish. I'm sorry. That's just the position I have on this. You're blatantly foolish. I would go a step further and call you retarded, but I'm going to reserve that for now. I'm going to keep that in the back pocket for later in case I need to say it.
Were you excited about them, or did you, like me, have this strange feeling about some of these characters that you just can't quite put into words yet? Tell me that in the comments below.
Like even that. Prime example, literally, you just saw the Traveler's gameplay matching what we saw in the story. Look at this. Hold up.
And even more, how did you find how the characters felt?
The Traveler put up a bubble shield around themselves while blocking an attack. Mind you, if you use Hydro Traveler and you hold down their skill button, their elemental skill, they will form a Hydro shield around themselves. So this matches what we see in gameplay.
Within both of these arcs, both from a story perspective and a gameplay perspective. Were you excited about them, or did you, like me?
And here we go, another scene, right? The Traveler, actually, this isn't something the Traveler does in... Well, actually, the Traveler does do this in gameplay, depending on the enemy he's fighting, and whether or not said element is within range of, you know, being mixed in with the swirl reaction. But we know Animal Traveler creates a tornado and then plunges it at, and not plunges it, but like thrusts it towards the opponent. We literally see this right here in the scene. Watch.
Me have this strange feeling about some of these characters that you just can't quite put into words yet.
Boom. Traveler created a tornado, thrusted it, swirled it with pyro, and thrusted it at Dottore. We see this gameplay. We see this at the start of the entire game when the Traveler is testing out their elemental skill and elemental burst for the first time in story. At the first Statue of the Seven we ever come across. So I would love to know if someone wants to play this argument with me. How does this not match their gameplay?
Yes.
The only thing you can argue doesn't match their gameplay is the fact that the Traveler used two elements at the same time and triggered elemental reaction by themselves without the need of a partner. That's the only thing that they don't do in their gameplay. I mean, they pseudo do that if, like I said earlier, if the element is around when they do that swirl reaction, or if the enemy is made of said element that isn't animo, that can swirl with animo. So technically they kind of do it, just not like, oh, they're using their own body to then pump out the element to then cause the elemental reaction.
Tell me that in the comments below. Of course, if you should be successful on any of my future videos.
I ain't gonna lie, bro. You said that way too fast. You should have slowed down and then say it.
Alright, let's get into it. So if you enjoy Genshin Impact, or if you've been playing this game for as long as I have, basically since its launch, then you'd be fully aware that the Genshin Impact story does something that not many gacha games can really pull off, and that is character hype. I mean, when you look at characters like Varka, a character we're going to be getting very soon within the game, you start to realize that Genshin Impact has really done a pretty decent job of building up hype around this.
Decent, I would say they did a great job. Nothing about Varka or Columbina or any character that we were teased about did not match the hype or the build-up that they were getting from the story from other characters and whatnot. Unless you're one of those people who thought Columbina was going to be some eldritch, horrific being, then you're off the rocker, because that was made from a fan animation, and that isn't what was presented in the story. Because again, hearsay by two characters who aren't friends with Columbina gave us an idea of Columbina versus what this story versus what she actually is. AKA, she defied expectations in a actually good way, not a bad way.
This character right from the very beginning of the
I mean, unless you're one of those individuals who think Columbina got her character rewritten before Nightcry dropped so that she can be more of a pleasant character and not some bad villain, despite the fact we never seen her do anything villainous to begin with.
Genshin Impact has really done a pretty decent job of building up hype around this character right from the very beginning of the game. And yes, I have complained before about how Genshin Impact sometimes fumbles this aspect, but the
in what way do they fumble it? Because last time you did a video talking about this, I reacted to it. Your whole perception of something they fumbled it was so off. It was off base. You sat there and complained about Genshin doing this and being like, oh, look how bad this is. And then you brought up Withering Waves And Withering Waves did the exact same thing you complain about Genshin doing when it comes down to building up their characters before they finally arrive in the story. Your complaint basically lied on, oh, it took too long, versus Withering Waves Architect that was like, oh, they appeared in the next patch. Which is fine, by the way. But we know which game is doing what. Genshin is playing a long game, Withering Waves is playing short term. Technically speaking, because we're speed running through the story as of right now. And also, the Architect ain't really worth gassing up. Let's be for real. He was a random character that did come into the story that, of course, we knew about, but we only knew about him thanks to Furlova's character information and the 2.5 story, and then him finally appearing in 2.7, which wasn't really that much build up and hype for the character, especially when they could have built him up even more throughout the story from version 1 throughout version 2 up to his, eventual reveal in version 2.7.
But the reality is that there are very few gacha games that can consistently keep characters' relevance and importance over such a long period of time. Putting characters in situations where their presence and significance can persist over multiple years. And in Genshin Impact's case, 5 whole years. That is honestly insane. The same thing can be said for characters like Columbina. I mean, you start to realize that when it comes to keeping the audience invested, when it comes to keeping players in suspense and consistently generating hype for a character, there are very few games that know how to build that kind of anticipation as well as Genshin Impact does. But here's where things start to get a little peculiar. And I'm sure almost everyone watching this video has noticed this in some way or another. See, when these long-awaited characters finally release, characters that have been built up for over many years, yes, there is definitely a part of the community that absolutely rejoices. I mean, for a lot of people, this is their favorite character finally becoming playable, and that alone is enough to make the release feel like a huge celebration. But at the exact same time, you also start to notice that there is an equally vocal part of the community that feels underwhelmed.
Yeah, they feel underwhelmed because they think Genshin's gameplay should be like Withering Waves. That's why. Let's be honest here. Let's not sit here and act like that's not the core reason why they feel quote-unquote underwhelmed by her gameplay. Niggas are legitly, niggas cannot explain to me what exactly did they expect Columbina to do. Let's ignore her entire gameplay. Let's ignore everything that she did in Not Cry, story-wise, and like anytime she fought against either Rerir or the Doctor. Let's ignore all those scenes, right? Let's ignore all that shit. Please explain to me. I would love for someone who disagrees. Please explain to me, what did you expect Columbina to be like, both story-wise and her gameplay before she released? I would love to know. Because we're back at this conversation yet again. Someone explain to me right now. I need you to explain. Because if you can't give a solid answer that makes any lick of sense, this conversation is done. This complaint, trash. It's garbage.
A portion of players who are not afraid to express how dissatisfied they are with what
no one told them to be afraid to express their opinion. They can express their opinion, but don't be surprised when someone slaps it to the floor and counters it with logic and being like, bro, what the hell did you expect said character to be like in gameplay wise? Right? What did you expect? Case in point, I can use another example. What did anybody here expect? Not Columbina, but let's do the character from Xenozone Zero. Who here had any expectation of the Angels of Delusion's gameplay? Who? Tell me what you thought what was going to happen in her gameplay before the characters were even released, before their story even came out. What did you expect their gameplay to be like? Who did you expect to be a DPS, a support, or stun? Right? Let's ignore the fact that you potentially saw leaks referring to what role they may play gameplay wise, right? Let's ignore all that. What did you expect them to do? What do you expect their gameplay to look like visually? Did you have an expectation that was grounded in reality with the information that what little information we did have about the Angels of Delusion? Because we know that they were idols. We know that. So based off that, what did we expect to see from their gameplay that, either did happen or didn't happen when their characters were released?
It's what these characters actually end up doing once they become playable. And if you want a perfect example of this exact situation, you really don't have to look any further than the Varka leaks. The discussions that came out because of these leaks, ones that feel very similar to those that were present because of
hold up. Let's read this. Because I was tuned into this whole conversation. His gameplay is boring as hell. Yeah, so one person thinks his gameplay boring versus other people who think his gameplay is good. So clearly that's not an objective opinion. Or the objective consensus of everyone's opinion. Watch y'all switch up on him in 6.4, just like y'all clowned on Durin and Columbina, and now everyone and their mama has both of them. I have both of them. I didn't clown them either because I knew what I was getting from this game. Wait, so the old leak was true? He's a standard character. There is no proof that he's a standard character. Don't know where that came from. How are people saying this is cooked? This is just showing his attack strings. There is 0 buffs in here. OMG. Not really understanding the 0 buff thing. But, again, back to his gameplay, right? We knew Varka taught Razor how to use a greatsword. So that means he uses a greatsword in combat. We've known this for years. And now we're seeing it in his gameplay. I would love to know, how does this not match what we learned about via Razor? How? I need to know. Personally, I don't see his gameplay being boring. Again, the only way you can see this nigga's gameplay being boring, the only way you could potentially see it, because you've been tied up in this Wuwa versus Genshin-ish, and you think Withering Wave's gameplay is better than Genshin's. So you look at Varka's gameplay compared to that of a Wuwa character, and you're like, the Wuwa character looks better. Varka is trash. He's boring. Blah 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 blah. That's the only way you come to that conclusion. Now, let me be a little more nuanced. Right? Let me do this as well. Let's say you don't play Wuwa, you only play Genshin, and you come to the conclusion that Varka's gameplay looks boring to you. Explain, how does it look boring? Because every character in the gameplay can be boring to you. It's not something that unique to Varka. It's an opinion, a subjective opinion that can be applied to every character in the game. Someone could literally sit here and say that they find Shavrusa's gameplay to be boring because she's meant to be played as a support character. And the only reason you use her is to use her elemental skill. That's the only real reason you use her. Right? You see what I'm getting at? Yes, she's a 4-star character, but that still applies to a character's gameplay being boring to someone if they find it boring. Someone could find Raiden Shogun's gameplay to be boring. Someone could find Venti's gameplay to be boring. Someone can find Zhongli's gameplay to be boring. Someone can find New Valette, Risley, Farina, so on, so forth, gameplay to be boring. Hopefully you get the point I'm making.
Leaks. The discussions that came out because of these leaks, ones that feel very similar to those that were present because of the Columbina leaks. A discussion that shows just how...
Let's read this. It's kind of boring, but y'all ain't ready yet. But Ult is amazing though. She's so cool, but why are normal attacks so empty? I'm really not complaining. But man, look, it's so pretty though. Linne and Mournier, y'all got competition. It's kind of underwhelming, but the burst... And I want to touch on this whole thing about the Columbina's basic attack animations being underwhelming. Bro, you literally feel the... Hold up. I'm going to say this right now. This is my opinion. I literally feel that same exact way about Columbina's... how people feel about Columbina's normal attack animations, normal attack string, right? I feel the same way about it in the story when I see her use it, right? Yeah, the moment is hype, right? But her attacks have never held weight behind them. So if you're feeling underwhelmed by not feeling weight behind her attacks that she does in her basic attack animations, you shouldn't be surprised because the same thing happened in the story. How many times did we see her use her water string stuff, right, against Rhaenyra or Dottore, and there was no real weight behind it? If anything, it felt more like a nuisance towards the enemy. The closest thing that it was doing was like fast-paced attacks, which I gotta show an example of this now. Let's go ahead and move up to about... I want to move up to about somewhere around here because this is when the fight started. Okay, around right here. Let's start from right here and we're going to press forward. Tell me, did you feel the weight behind her attacks when that happened or what? Because I didn't feel it. It was fast. That's the only thing I felt from her attacks. Fast. I didn't feel no damage behind those. Which is natural because she's not really that much of a damage dealer to begin with. But anyway, let's continue. Even this attack where Rear does with the hand stuff, even this stuff feels lightweight in comparison to everything else he's done. He's done explosive ground slamming attacks that like explode on contact. These do not feel that same way.
You use my own power against me?
Just like how you stole Kuvaki. Look familiar?
And there he goes, using the hand thing again. It's clearly his signature move. Tell me, we saw the water string stuff again. Tell me, did y'all feel weight behind that when you saw it? When it made contact? Because it didn't. It was light. So, when we see that in her gameplay, how is there something to complain about? That same feel of like quote unquote underwhelmingness in her basic attack animation, you feel the same way. Well, you may not feel the same way, but that's the same sense you get seeing her lightweight attacks hit Rear. Even though they're coming at fast repetition, there's no real power behind it. There's no oomph, right? Like, even the sound they make when they make contact, it does not come with this boom sound when it hits, right? Like, compare this to, like, Marvika when she did, like, those aerial attacks against the captain, right? You can feel the boom behind it because there were explosions happening. There were boom, boom, boom. But you don't really hear that with Columbina's. It's more like ting, 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 right? Anyway, let's get back to this.
Divided the entire community is with these characters. But as much as all of these sound like the main issue, that is not actually what I find peculiar. What is really interesting when you actually take a step back and really look into the situation is that it wasn't always like this. I mean, if you look at characters like Olachino and the Wanderer, both characters also being built and teased for a very long time as well, you would find out that they were exceptionally loved by a huge portion of the community.
They were exceptionally loved by a huge portion of the community because people loved the character, not their gameplay. Their gameplay was a surprise to them because, for one, we had no expectation of Arlecchino's gameplay because we never seen her in action throughout the entire Fontaine story. The same thing with Wanderer. Wanderer, my nigga, we had no expectation of even his gameplay either, especially after what we did in the story. We had no expectation of his gameplay. People assumed that he was going to be an electro unit, not an animal unit. So when he became an animal unit, people were surprised. I think there's a little dishonest, like the way he's framing this is a little dishonest in my opinion. And then to go back to the gameplay again, right? Who here would have thought Arlecchino's gameplay was going to be the way that it was? Who here thought that she was going to be like a polearm wielder that wields a scythe in her combat? Who? Who here thought that? Before Arlecchino even came into the story, who here thought that that was what she was going to do? Who here thought that her ult animation was going to be seeing the crimson moon in the background as these crimson spikes, explode on contact with this X? Who here thought that Wanderer's gameplay was going to be him shooting animal slashes at the enemy, doing animal swirls, flying, hovering in the air and flying, and then doing a stomp attack with utter disrespect in his ult animation? Who? Who here thought that? Nobody. They didn't have an expectation of what their gameplay would look like because they never seen anything in the story to even justify it.
When they became playable. And yes, I understand that the Wanderer was involved in a lot of drama due to their story. But even then, as a character,
he wasn't involved in no drama in the story. Niggas was over here overblowing, talking about he was a villain that was made into a good guy out of nowhere. When it's like, no, that's not what fucking happened. Anyone who played through that damn story understands what exactly happened. He wasn't even like still friends with this nigga Wanderer, unless you're talking about like that person who killed a cat over Wanderer type ish. Unless you're referring to that, in my opinion, that has nothing to do with Genshin Impact in the slightest. That's a deranged individual. What's fascinating during this thing is that Wanderer has a remarkable talent for making decisions with absolute confidence, like Aiden did. This isn't really this is not drama. This is just pointing out something that's interesting about the character. I understand that some may feel a connection with fictional characters because you like the lore, but those players need mass therapy and spread the cat. See, this is about the cat thing, about that dude killing that cat. The fact that Warner treats me exactly. Imagine the relation. Well, this Wander drama for Genshin is making fucked up. Remember, this game and Wander isn't a real bestie. Yeah, this is referred to the cat thing, like I thought. Anyway,
character, he was very well received. So now the question becomes, what exactly changed? Why is it that recently there has been such a drastic shift in how well these highly anticipated characters are received once they finally release? And if you're thinking right now that,
like I said earlier, it's because people seen Wuthering Waves gameplay and they think Genshin Impact gameplay should be Wuthering Waves, when no, it shouldn't. So people have an expectation of Genshin, unrealistic rather, expectation of Genshin Impact's gameplay, and they're assuming that that's what it should be versus what it actually is. And then they're bitching about the fact that Columbina isn't like moving around like Amith, which makes no effing sense to begin with, when Amith is a close quarters and long range combatant, which Columbina isn't even really a combatant to begin with. She's not some trained combatant in the slightest. All she does is play like background support when she attacks, especially if she's in a team fight.
that the reason for this shift is simply because of Wuthering Waves? Well, yes, but also no. Because usually, and I fall into this trap as well, when people compare Wuthering Waves characters to their Genshin counterparts, the first thing we immediately look at is their animation, the sheer flamboyance, the style, the spectacle in how these characters move and fight, which is very different from what you typically get in Genshin Impact. I mean, that was basically the entire argument in this specific video. The whole reason we believe that a character like Amy felt more impressive than someone like Columbina. And yes, don't get me wrong, animation absolutely plays a huge role in how we perceive these characters. It contributes a lot to why Columbina might feel underwhelming to some people, while characters like Amy feel completely
I'm glad you recognize that. At least there's self-awareness in this. Thank God.
phenomenal. But I don't think that is the main reason.
That is the main reason. If you're really about to try to argue that this is not the main reason for why people are talking about Columbina's gameplay is underwhelming compared to Amith when they look at Wuthering Waves, that is a blatant lie. Like, this is 100% because people look at Wuthering Waves and look at Columbina from Genshin and they're like, oh, it's underwhelming. Yeah, of course you'll feel that way when you're looking at a fast-paced game versus a slow-paced game. Or a game that isn't centered around doing counterattacks or like parry attacks and shit like that. Or doesn't have as much freedom of movement in combat in comparison to what, Genshin does. Or what, not Genshin, Wuwa, right?
I really don't think animation alone is the core cause of this sense of underwhelm that some players have been feeling towards Genshin Impact characters recently. Because
no, it is blatantly Wuthering Waves. To sit here and try to argue otherwise is, in my opinion, stupid. I was about to say retarded. I'm gonna reserve that for later.
when you really think about it, there's no realistic way Genshin Impact could fully emulate what Wuthering Waves does. I mean, these are two fundamentally different games, built around very different combat philosophies.
Exactly, but people don't care about that. They only want to hear their opinion. They only want to be like, oh, Genshin's gameplay should be Wuthering Waves, which is why you see people make such claims like, oh, Genshin should have a parry system just like Wuthering Waves does. Genshin doesn't need that, honestly. It really doesn't. Because what does that provide to the game when your whole core concept of the game is be doing elemental reaction damage and just elemental damage, countering the enemy's own element that they have, or making them overheat or overload or stunned in place based on, oh, they've absorbed too much of this element and now they've gone into a stun lock phase, right? But no one cares about that. They just want it to be Wuthering Waves with a counter attack and parry system.
Relates what Wuthering Waves does. I mean, these are two fundamentally different games, built around very different combat philosophies, different pacing, and different animation priorities. They demand different kinds of play styles, and naturally, they also deliver very different kinds of visual expressions through their characters. So if the problem we're facing with Genshin Impact characters isn't really animation, then what exactly is it? And really, this is something that makes so much sense when you really think about it. It is how they are characterized within those animations. And there's no better example of this than the Amith and Columbina.
How they're characterized in the animation? Okay. Even with that, people are still wrong to sit here and say, oh, Columbina's gameplay is underwhelming. Because it doesn't match her characterization? It most definitely matches her characterization if someone wants to argue otherwise. Columbina is a frail, dainty flower. And we see that happen even in her animations in the story when she's fighting against someone. She ain't out here pitting the pinned to the paper, really folding niggas to the floor with some epic damage going on. She's not doing that. She's throwing around her dainty, lightweight attacks in mass to attempt to overwhelm the enemy. But she's not out here like, boom, doing crazy stuff. It may look crazy, but it's something we've been seeing her do since Rear, came after her up to that point until where we are now.
How they are characterized within those animations. And there's no better example of this than the Amith and Columbina comparison. Because what you really start to realize with Columbina is that if you were already a bit underwhelmed from watching her animations on their own, that feeling only gets deeper when you actually go through her story. When you see how the narrative presents just how powerful she truly is in game. I mean, Columbina is portrayed as being so incredibly powerful that the story strong.
This is the same old animation she does. This is it right here. How exactly does this not match what the freak we see in her gameplay? Someone needs to explain that right now. This is the same thing she does right here in her fucking animation. I'm over here cursing like a sailor right now.
Strongly suggest that even the Archons and the Dragon Sovereigns cannot come close to matching her strength. She is practically depicted as someone who can manipulate or influence the very laws of Tivat itself. I mean, we're talking about a character whose level of power starts to rival factions like the Shades, or at least sits on the same conversation. Now combine that with the fact that this is a character who has been teased for years, a character we already understood to be extremely powerful even before we knew anything concrete about her, simply based on the voice lines and reactions of everyone who has ever mentioned her in game. And naturally, the expectations were always going to skyrocket. I mean, just look at all the fan animations of Columbina.
Yeah, again, I'm glad he mentioned the fan animation. The fan animation is not a representation of the actual character. If you are using fan animations to represent a character that has not shown up in the story at all, and then you're making a headcanon of what you expect them to be versus what they come out to be, sorry, you're the one in the wrong in this situation. The devs ain't at fault for that. No, that's you. You're the one at fault for that. Because you overblew what you thought was going to be Columbina's character, what you thought she would be represented as, versus how those writers actually intended to represent her as.
Dedicated fans spent so much time creating long before release. Back when we barely even knew who she really was.
Yeah, barely even knew who she was. So why the F are we using headcanon crap like fan animations and fan art to be the deciding factor on what a character should be like? Are we freaking for real right now?
That alone shows the type of expectation that the entire community had for Columbina.
Headcanon expectation, by the way.
Barely even knew who she really was. That alone shows the type of expectation that the entire community had for Columbina simply based off of her hype. And the idea really is simple. When the game gives a character that much inward presence, that much narrative strength, we as players, not just in Genshin Impact.
We only knew 2 things about Columbina realistically. We didn't even have as much information about Columbina to begin with. Again, the fan animation cannot be what we use as the driving factor for what we expect the character to be like. No, we shouldn't be doing that. Absolutely not. To sit here and run on that is nonsense. I gotta pull out my bag now, retarded. It's like, oh my God. It's like just listening to, even if people are running on that logic, their logic is flawed greatly. Literally, we had 0 to no information about Columbina. The first piece of information we even got about any of the Harbingers was from Tartaglia. The way he spoke about Columbina, he was like, I feel weird around her. Like, I feel a little weird around her, right? And we have no reason to understand why he feels weird about her. Maybe because he uses abyssal energy in combat and that riles him up inside. Or he just doesn't understand Columbina's existence, or he can't really get a lock on it and it's making him feel uneasy. Again, we'd have no idea why he feels uneasy around her. Like, we don't. Even when it came time to the story of Nodcry, we still don't understand why exactly he even feels that way. The only way we can understand that he feels that way around Columbina, we have to see him interact with Columbina on screen and get an understanding of why he feels that way about Columbina versus just listening to his voice line. Because it could be a number of things for why he feels uneasy around Columbina. It could be a number of things, but we don't know the exact reason why. When Columbina has never been threatening. Nothing about Columbina's aura, if that's what he was afraid of, gave off the signal of, oh, she's a threat. She can signify to us when she feels threatened by someone else.
The game gives a character that much inward presence, that much narrative strength. We as players, not just in Genshin Impact, but in every gacha game, naturally want to feel that power, that presence ourselves. When we spend our time and money to obtain these so-called godlike characters, we want to feel like we're actually controlling something godlike. So tell me, does this feel like a godlike character to you?
建模完成。
This is so fucking honest. Even God, I'm so glad he mentioned that. We literally have Nahida for crying out loud. We have Farina for crying out loud. We have 2 god characters in the game, or godlike characters in the game, who play support, not DPS. And Columbina is another example of this. Tell me, who was complaining about Nahida's gameplay, despite the fact she was an Archon? Who was complaining about that? Who was complaining about Farina's gameplay, despite the fact she technically a fraudulent Archon? Who's complaining about that? Nobody. What about Nouvelette? Who is out here complaining about Nouvelette doing a freaking hydro pump blast for his charge attack? And even doing his ult animation. Doing like water streams shooting down or shooting up from the ground or whatever. Who's complaining about that? Nobody. Nobody complained about the basic attack animation about Nouvelette. No one complained about the basic attack animation for Farina or for Nahida. But when Columbina suddenly comes out, now we're complaining. Miss me with that shit.
建模完成。
And then we gonna act like she doesn't have her own unique animation. She's sitting here singing. She's dancing in her combat. Are we not gonna mention that? We're gonna be like, oh, she's underwhelming. But the thing is, she hasn't done some crazy damaging feat that warrants her gameplay to reflect that. I'm sorry, she just hasn't. We're acting like Columbina is out here moving around like freaking Mavwika for crying out loud, and then we're complaining that her gameplay is something that's soft, something that's light. Like, again, what are we talking about here?
And that's really the interesting part, because if you're being completely honest, when you actually analyze Amith as a character, you start to realize that on paper, she isn't really doing anything entirely new. I mean, she's not the first character with flashy animations in the game, so her basic attacks in isolation aren't really anything groundbreaking. She's also not the first character to transform mid-battle, so that concept alone isn't anything revolutionary either. When you look at these elements one by one, none of them are truly unique on their own. But what Wooden Waves does is that it keeps layering more and more onto Amith. It keeps stacking spectacle on top of spectacle in a way that consistently reinforce the feeling that she is overwhelmingly powerful. The fact that within her attack sequence, you can chain what feels like up to 5 ultimate level animations. The fact that during her transformation, you can literally fly. The fact that when she uses her ultimates, the entire galaxy opens up across the screen. And even outside of her own kits, you have the combined visual effects when you run characters like Augusta, Yuno, and Amith together. That just really explode with this visual intensity. And when you really think,
yeah, it explodes with visual intensity because they're combatants. These niggas fight, for crying out loud. Every day they're fighting something. Every time there's something big happening, they're fighting, physically moving their body around, fighting. Duh. Of course it matches. I'm gonna say this right now. If Augusta's gameplay looked anything like Columbina's, people's complaint would be valid. Right? But Augusta's gameplay being the way that it is now 100% matches the character and what we've seen from the story. The same thing applies to Columbina. The same thing applies to Farina. The same thing applies to Yuno. The same thing applies to Amith. So on and so forth. We can list a whole bunch of characters from both games. Their gameplay matches one-to-one what we expected of their character from the story. So again, this question has to come back again. What in the hell did people sit here and expect Columbina's gameplay to look like? Someone needs to answer that question and give a genuine, honest answer.
You think about it, none of these things are even relevant to our actual in-game damage numbers or mechanical strength. A lot of it is purely for visual enjoyment, purely for spectacle. But at the same time, it is exactly these visual layers, these constant reminders of power through presentation, that make someone like Amith, a character that nobody even knew about before, suddenly have as much conversational value and hype as Columbina, a character that the entire community has been waiting for years. And right now, some of you might be thinking, oh, here we go again, the classic Genshin versus War video. But that is...
It is. To sit here and try to argue that it's not, it is.
It's actually not the point I'm trying to make here. Because where this conversation really starts to matter is when we begin to look ahead at the future powerful characters in Genshin Impact. I mean, with everything we've seen so far, the real question becomes, can we truly trust Genshin Impact to make characters like the Shades feel as powerful in gameplay?
Yes, because we see them do it with combatant characters like Marwika. Again, we're sitting here complaining that Columbina, this gameplay does not look like that of a combatant compared to literal combatant characters you just showed earlier. And being like, oh, is the Shades going to be, their gameplay going to be like Columbina's? Which honestly, if we're being honest, it's probably a 50-50 chance that it's going to be the case. Because the Shades are overpowered. They're fundamental pillars of power in the world structure of Genshin. Even if they don't move around doing so many crazy animations in their animations, you're going to feel the power behind their moves. For example, if Asmodee, the Shade of Space, right? If she were to become playable, we already have an expectation of what her gameplay should look like based on the cutscenes that we saw. So, guess what? If she drops a freaking cube in her ult animation and it slams down into the ground, causing an explosion of some kind, or if her elemental skill, whatever that may be, forms a giant cube and explodes in her animation, right? It's going to feel like it matches 1-to-1. Because we've seen it from the animation in the game when we first start the game. Most of these Shades are not, without a shadow of a doubt, I do stand on this, that these Shades aren't even combatants. They just got overwhelming power. So even if we think about their gameplay and their movement, realistically, they shouldn't even be moving a lot. They should be standing in place. Because we literally saw the Shade of Space stand in one place and do nothing. She didn't move at all. She let her cubes do the talking. She stood in one place, just held her hand out. The cubes went flying about, moving about, trying to capture the twins. She stood in place. And then the twins came back, circled around, and attacked her. And guess what happened? She had a shield around herself, an invisible shield. Her body isn't moving at all. She's using bare minimum movement, and she's overwhelming the opponent. Right? And honestly, as I think about Columbina's gameplay right now, Columbina's gameplay sort of reflects that as well. Because even with the basic attack animation, the basic attack may not overwhelm the opponent because it's light. It's like, what, 3-4 attacks? But you got to consider the elemental reaction that triggers a coordinated attack that nukes the enemy as well. And triggers multiple lunar-based reactions, and she constantly keeps getting that coordinated attack that nukes the enemy over and over and over again based on the lunar reaction. So it fits, especially knowing what we saw from the cutscenes of Columbina in combat. So if we're really going to play this argument with if the Shades gameplay going to be like Columbina's, more than likely it will be, because why would these god level beings need to be combatants in the first place? We have no idea if they've even been in combat. Or actually, yes, we do. Because we know that the Shades helped the primordial one fight against Nibelung when he came back with abyssal power. But we don't know what that looks like, though. What, did they just throw their attacks at the enemy and they just stood in place? More than likely. I don't see the reason why they need to move about and move around. Honestly, knowing how powerful they are.
Question becomes, can we truly trust Genshin Impact to make characters like the Shades feel as powerful in gameplay as they're advertised to be in the story? Or what about the heavenly principles themselves? If they eventually become playable, can we honestly trust that the hundreds of dollars players might spend pulling for these characters will actually feel justified once they finally release?
It will. Anyone who thinks it's not going to feel justified are niggas who's going to just complain for the sake of it and be like, oh, since it's not like Wuthering Waves gameplay, since they're not doing 25 different animation sequences in their basic attacks or in their skill or in their ult, therefore they're bad. Oh, look at this waste of money. Genshin is such a predatory game. That's exactly what's gonna happen. Let's be fucking for real right now.
Because just like Columbina, these are characters we've heard about and speculated on for the longest time. Characters whose reputation alone already establishes their power without the game needing to explicitly spell it out.
You can have an overpowered character not move around at all, honestly. They can stay in place and not do shit. They don't even need to move. So even if we think about movement, like I said earlier, an overpowered character doesn't need to move at all. They can stay in place. Unless they fight against someone that forces them to actually move. Then it's like, okay, now you fight someone that you're fighting against someone of your equal power that's making you move around.
And like I said at the start of the video, there is really no gacha game that creates long-term character hype quite as effectively as Genshin Impact. I mean, just think about everything a character like Ishtarat has been associated with. The creation of Vensi, her deep connection to the gods of Inazuma, everything concerning Kanura. I mean, these are monumental world-shaping.
Yeah, monumentally world-shaping characters. Again, what do you expect her gameplay to be like? If she freezes time in her ult animation or her elemental skill, that'd be cool, right? But what do you expect beyond that? Because just because a character has, is touted to be like this overpowered character, do not expect them to be blowing planets up. Don't expect them to be destroying cities and mountains and crap. Right? Because when people hear these terms of being like, oh man, this person can create time, niggas immediately will jump to this whole freaking, oh man, they must be able to create a freaking portal. They're a fourth dimensional being. They can create black holes and shit. And it's like, bro, you overblowing it from what we're seeing in the story right now. For example, I remember someone having a back and forth with me in community post a couple months back, probably like last year. Someone was like in this whole Traveler versus Rover, who's gonna win in the fight. Niggas mentioned, the fact that, Traveler isn't as strong as Rover because Rover can stop time and they're a fourth dimensional being, which honestly doesn't mean shit now, knowing that the Traveler isn't unaffected by any time manipulation in the slightest, which we actively saw in the story. So that's not going to work in the versus fight. But like, even with that, right, we don't even see Rover do anything related to time manipulation at all to such a grand showcasing in the story at all. But people were gassed that up because the story says the Rover is strong, but we don't see that at all throughout their game, in their gameplay at all when it comes down to spectral power, nor do we see it in the animation cutscenes of them using said power.
Vensi, her deep connection to the gods of Inazuma, everything concerning Kanura. I mean, these are monumental world-shaping events tied to a single name. And then to further reinforce that strength, we get scenes like these. Scenes that imply beings on this level have the power to destroy entire worlds as if it were nothing.
Where's this cutscene from? Because I don't think this is a Genshin cutscene at all. I don't know where this scene is from, but I'm pretty sure this is not a Genshin scene. Unless a Genshin cutscene at all. This looks like this probably some fan animation someone made. Someone let me know.
Scenes that imply beings on this level have the power to destroy entire worlds as if it were nothing.
When was it ever touted that the Shades can destroy the entire world if they wanted? When was it ever implied that the Moon Sisters could destroy the world whenever they wanted? Excuse you? Where'd you get this from? Because that's not what's told in the game. That's not what's told in the story. Again, where are you getting that from? This is not some mass destruction. What are we talking about? This wasn't some mass destruction. She didn't destroy the whole area. She shot at the tree. She inflicted death onto the tree and onto the individual reading the book. That's all this was. It wasn't some mass destruction. Like I said, the shade of death inflicted death onto this person and onto the tree. And to the crow that she stomped on. How are we going to sit here and complain or even insinuate that we won't see something akin to this in the gameplay by inflicting death, which more than likely will be just her inflicting pyro because, fire and death go hand in hand. So there's going to be fire damage of some kind. But again, using scenes like this to be like, oh, this is what we're going to see Without a Shadow of a Doubt in gameplay. We don't even know what we're going to see in gameplay. That's an assumption. We have to wait and see what they actually show us in their gameplay if said characters become playable. And she absorbed that death into her, or that life into her, clearly.
No. This looks more like Rhine-Daughter's doing.
These are the kind of characters we're going to be getting in the future of Genshin Impact.
We do not know that. That's an assumption.
The kind of entity that would eventually be released and most likely become playable. But with everything we've seen,
most likely, we do not know if they're going to be playable.
Of Genshin Impact. The kind of entity that would eventually be released and most likely become playable. But with everything we've seen so far from other characters like Columbina, Jiren, or even someone like Varka.
Oh my god. What did y'all niggas expect during his gameplay to be like? Did you think he was going to be breathing fire, destroying everything? Like, what are we talking about here? Again, we're sitting here making grand assumptions about what a character's gameplay should be like with little to no information, and with what one showing of instance of like, oh, they did something, and being like, oh, since the gameplay doesn't reflect that, therefore the character is bad. Oh, what they showed in their gameplay is wrong or is inaccurate. Like, what the freak are we talking about? Who here? What expectation niggas had of Durin's gameplay? We knew that Durin was gonna come back to life. We knew that. We had no idea what the gameplay was gonna be like. The gameplay that we are shown of his character matches his character 1-to-1. There's no arguing with that. If you want to argue with it, cool. You're in the wrong, blatantly. With Varka, what we learned about Varka related to great swords matches what we see in his gameplay. Again, how is that incorrect? How is that wrong? How does that not match? Columbina, same-ish. We've seen from the story up till her character release. What about what we've seen in the story does not match in her gameplay? Explain. Because what we saw in the story matches her gameplay 1-to-1. Obviously, with the exception of her opening a moon gate. Other than that, we see the same ish. Please tell me how exactly did Genshin fail to represent their character animations for these lore important characters? How did Genshin fail to do that? Because it's matching 1-to-1. Again, like I said earlier, this just goes back to the whole, from what we saw from Withering Waves and their character animations, having like 10 plus animations in their freaking combat. Therefore, people are assuming that Genshin should be the same way. When no, it should not. Genshin does not need to be like Withering Waves. Withering Waves does not need to be like Genshin. Hold up. Let me, for example, Vagrant Order. Vagrant Order has turn-based combat. The turn-based combat does not match what, look, this has been a video from like, what, 4 years ago. Like, the turn-based combat doesn't even match what we see in like the animation, the story, right? Is that wrong? No, it's not wrong. Because this is just showing like their noble phantasms and their skills and whatnot. And we do see that in the story whenever they're in combat. So actually, I don't know why this video is painted in such a way. I guess they're just complaining the gameplay of FGO versus the story of how it's animated. I mean, how it would be if they animate the entire story, which obviously, of course, is going to look freaking different. Like, the enemy does, the characters in the story wouldn't wait for the enemy to get their attack off first and then we attack. Like, no, we're just going to attack regardless. That's the only difference. Anyway, what was another example? I wanted to bring up Tales of Berseria. Should I mention Tales of Berseria? I feel like Tales of Berseria may be another good example as well. You know what? I'll leave it alone for right now. I think I made my point abundantly clear throughout this whole reaction.
Characters who were introduced to us as the strongest from the very moments we heard about them. Can we really trust Genshin Impact to make these future strongest characters?
These characters will be strong regardless. If you're sitting here wondering if they're going to botch their animation showing their strength, they never did. I would love for someone to point out a character that had their strength butchered because, oh, it does in the game. Because right now, there's no character in the game that's got their quote-unquote animations butchered in the slightest. This whole thing about Columbina acting like her animations were butchered before her character release is such bullshit when you actually look at what we saw in the story up to her character release versus what people expected thanks to fan animations of her character. Genu effing lit. Like, what the freak are we talking about? I'm sorry I'm blowing a gasket right now in this reaction, but this whole conversation irks my nerve because it's mad dishonest. It's being obtuse on purpose. To sit here and be like, oh, her character got butchered. Oh, Varka got butchered. Durin surprisingly got butchered. How did Durin get butchered? We never even seen this nigga in combat at all. We haven't even seen that freaking abyssal dragon Durin fight anything to even come close to an expectation of what we to expect from Durin's gameplay. Like, what are we talking about here?
Actually feel as godly as they're portrayed once we actually get them as playable units.
Again, like I mentioned before, Nuvalet, Farina, Nahida, Venti, Zhongli, Mavwika, each and every one of these archons matches what they showed off in their gameplay and what we see a little bit in the story. We don't really see, Venti and Zhongli fight a lot, so we didn't really have an expectation of their combat until their character release, honestly. For A, we did see her combat, and so we did get an assumption of what her animation may look like for her gameplay, and it matches 1-to-1. Same thing with Nahida, same thing with Farina, same thing with Nuvalet, same thing with freaking Mavwika, and so on, up to this point where we are now in Not Cry. Again, someone better write me a list of Genshin characters that were had their animations butchered versus what we saw in the game. I better see it on my freaking comment section right now.
Because the reality is that Wooden Waves has gone beyond simply asking for our trust in this regard. It has actively earned it. I mean, Geshu-Lin is inevitably going to become a playable character in Wooden Waves. And if you ask anyone who genuinely enjoys the game, they will tell you that they are beyond excited for him. And excitement...
Yeah, they're beyond excited for it. And if he doesn't have any animations matching that of Ameth, they're going to be disappointed. Like people are with Luke. People are disappointed with Luke's animations because it doesn't match anything with Ameth. And I foresaw that this was going to happen. I foresaw this when I made a reaction to Ameth's gameplay. I predicted that if Luke's animations aren't on the same level, if not scratching anywhere near Ameth's, people are going to have an issue. And they did. Because they put all the budget towards Ameth, clearly. Luke's animations, at least for his combat, it looks okay, right? It's not something like the ride home about versus Ameth. Why do you think Ameth is getting talked about more so in comparison to Luke? Because there's a night and day difference between the two, duh. We saw where the effort went towards. If you want to talk about a character that looked butchered in comparison to another, it's looking like Luke right now in this conversation. And any other future male character, honestly, which is going to be really sad.
Excitement that isn't just blind hype, one that is rooted in how strong he would feel simply based on everything we have seen from previous characters.
Bro, this shit is based on blind hype. What are we talking about? That's the core driving reason for why niggas had a headcanon expectation of characters' animations to begin with. Unless the character was thrown into the story out of nowhere, so we didn't have an expectation to form at all, which is only like somewhat rare that happens. Other moments is like, no. Oh, actually, it's rare. Like, for example, Zabai. Zabai was mentioned in passing in Leeway, not even by any character, but because of a book that we obtained in Leeway, right? And she appeared at the end in the most recent story arc that happened after 6.3 Archon Quest, right? In Leeway, with the whole Lancerite. She appears. Throughout the entire thing of it, we don't get a expectation of her gameplay because we've never seen her in the story up till now. So we had no true, even with the little bit of information we did hear about a white Adeptus, it was so minuscule that people had to literally run back in time to reread that book to be like, oh, did they ever talk about Zabai before in passing? Was she ever mentioned in passing? Was she ever shown in passing in any Leeway Lancerite cutscenes? People barely found any up to that, book, and that was it. So again, we didn't have any expectation of her gameplay at all to be like, oh man, her animations are bad, blah, 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 blah. Oh, they butchered her character. How so?
Just blind hype, one that is rooted in how strong he would feel simply based on everything we have seen from previous characters. The same thing applies to a character like the Grand Architect. I mean, this is the leader of the Fraxidus, essentially a god in their own right within the narrative. And when you view these characters, you would notice that there is this underlying confidence among players that when these characters finally release, we're actually going to feel every bit of the overwhelming power that they are set to possess.
Again, this goes back to how the game Genshin designed their gameplay versus how Wither Ways designed their gameplay. Genshin Impact gameplay is designed a certain way. Within Waves gameplay is designed a certain way. So when you feel the quote unquote overwhelmingness of their power, it's because they're doing multiple animations in their gameplay versus Genshin. Because Within Waves is structured like that, Genshin's is not. But to sit here and like act like, oh, Genshin just gonna drop the ball always 24/7, 20 for every freaking character that comes out. That's supposed to be a godlike character. I would love for someone to prove that, especially when we have Nahida, when we have Farina, when we have Nouvellette. Prove it. Because right now, the Columbina example is like the Columbina and Varka example, and even Durin example, just not good enough of an example to sit here and be like, oh, they butchered characters' gameplay versus what we saw in the story. It's not good enough because they match what we saw.
That's when these characters finally release. We're actually going to feel every bit of the overwhelming power that they are said to possess. But can we truly say the same about future Genshin Impact characters?
Yes, we can. To sit there and act like we can't is BS, and it's just for the sake of being like Genshin bad. Let's be fucking for real.
I'll leave that question open-ended. So tell me what you think. Do you believe I'm being irrational with this concern?
Yes, you are being irrational with this concern. You're overblowing it. Because again, we're comparing two different games and how they style their gameplay. And we're being like, Genshin is bad. Because they quote-unquote butchered Columbina. They quote-unquote butchered Varka, butchered Durin. And no one can explain how so. When what we see in the story related to these characters' animations, we literally see it in their gameplay. 1-to-1. We literally see the shit. If you're going to sit here and try to act like, no, we didn't see it, pull up every freaking... Not you, Nigerian perspective, but someone who's watching my reaction right now. If you think I'm lying right now, go pull up a cutscene right now. Pull it up. Prove me wrong right now. Because right now, this whole conversation related to this is, in my opinion, illegitimate. It's invalid to the nth degree.
About how Genshin Impact handles its most powerful characters. Or do you think these...
I find it interesting that he did not mention Nahida, Farina, Nouvellette, Zhongli, and the other Archons. I'm so interested that he did not mention them. Because mentioning them completely invalidates this whole thing about Columbina and Varka. It completely drops it to the freaking floor. Honestly.
I think this is actually something worth thinking about as we continue playing both of these games.
It's not worth thinking about. It's overblowing it. Anyway, I think we reached the end of the video. Appreciate anyone who watched my reaction all the way to the end. I know y'all love hour-long reactions. Anyway, like, sub, turn on the notification bell, join my YouTube community Discord if you wish, and download the Root app because, you know, Discord is about to be on this BS, and I found an alternative to Discord, so please download the Root app so you can be, you know, tied in with the alternate Root Discord server. I play 5 gacha games being Genshin Star Rail, Zenless Wuwa, and Art Knights Enfield. Excuse me. And I play 2 non-gacha games being Gravity Rush Remastered, Fate Samurai Remnant, and there's going to be 2 more games added to that, which are going to be Tales of Berseria Remastered and Ninja Gaiden 4, I believe. Hopefully, I can get my hands on it this upcoming Friday on February 27th. Hopefully. Anyway, that's all I got to say. Express your opinions in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next reaction. This is KallaTheYapper signing out. Peace.